Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new World Warships gameplay today on our channel. In this episode we're setting sail in the Tier VIII Soviet hybrid destroyer known as the Ognevoi, in a Tier VIII domination game on the map Trap. Sailing alone, the purpose of today's gameplay is for us to articulate how we can cover up the ground that we lack in terms of our team's composition when we've got less destroyers than the enemy team. Where, as you can see, we have 2 destroyers on our team compared to 3 on the enemy team. Now immediately I'm going to go towards Objective Bravo, which is at the heart of the map Trap, whereby it's right in the centre, and if you can take Bravo you have the ability to either push up towards the northeast towards Charlie, or push down southwest towards Objective Alpha, and it effectively provides a funnel if you control 2 of the objectives, i.e. Bravo and Charlie, or Bravo and Alpha, and it causes a funnel to the enemy team if they're pushing from the 3rd and final objective. Now as we make our way in, I've noticed that our friendly Benson is also heading this way, and this is going to fill me a little bit of confidence, because if we do end up in the scenario where it's a 2 versus 2 fight between the destroyers at Bravo, or even the 3 versus 2, which I'm dreading, at least we'll be able to put up a good fight. Although what I'm actually anticipating is that the enemy team will send 1 destroyer to each objective, because that way they can maximise the ground they cover at the start of the match and gain a positional or observational advantage. Now as we get closer and closer to B, what you'll notice is I start to actually turn a little bit southwestwards, and the logic behind this is I don't want to compromise my friendly Benson's manoeuvrability radius, whereby if they do get spotted on the objective, and I would expect the enemy carrier to send their fighters to spot them out over the objective, it is going to be likely that the Benson will want to turn away. If they turn towards us and we're too close, we will block them and will cause them and our own ship to become a sitting duck to incoming fire from the enemy team and any bombs or torpedoes that are dropped by the enemy carrier's planes. So instead, by giving my ally a little bit of space, that way they don't have to panic, and likewise I don't have to panic. And right on call, here come the fighters of the enemy Saipan that drift close enough to spot the Benson, but not close enough to spot us. Now we are running a full concealment build on our Ognevoi, which takes our detectability by sea all the way down to 6.1 km and by air down to 3.1 km. Now in terms of sea detection, you don't have as good detectability radii compared to the full concealment Benson, which comes down to approximately 5.8 km from what I recall, or the Kagero, your Japanese counterpart at Tier VIII, which goes all the way down to 5.4 km from what I recall. The Pan-Asian destroyer that you can go up against at Tier VIII has the same detectability radius as the Benson, and on top of that the Z-23, which took some pot shots at us with a full concealment build, has weaker concealment compared to our own. So that's the ship we'll be able to out-detect when we go head to head with them, but the other destroyers we're going to bump into at our tier, we won't be able to do so. Now here I make a questionable play, and if anything I actually think I throw away a smoke generator here, and that is I use my smoke to ensure we can capture the objective, because I was worried that I'd start taking some additional hits and therefore that would compromise our ability to take Objective Bravo quite quickly into the match, i.e. 2.5 minutes in. Now really, with our friendly Benson being positioned close behind the island in the middle of Objective Bravo, they could have got away with it. We could have just sat there, perhaps take 1 or 2 hits, and our Benson would have made up the difference. But we wanted to go for the safety role there. And immediately now I'm starting to think about how I can spread my ship's coverage of the map out, so that way I can provide a benefit to my team. Because Objective Charlie has been taken and our team's completely ignored Charlie, with the enemy team's Benson going up towards that objective. On the other counterstroke, what we can see is the enemy Akatsuki, the Tier VII Japanese destroyer, has gone towards Objective Alpha, and the only thing preventing them from taking it right now is a rather courageous Nuremberg, i.e. the Tier VI German cruiser that everybody loves to shoot at, position themselves in Alpha, although they're about to die, to the torpedo bombers, by looks of things, of the enemy Saipan. Now rushing over towards Alpha, what we can see is the enemy Akatsuki has been spotted by our Nuremberg, and they are starting to escape out towards the western side of Objective Alpha. They don't want to be a part of capturing it anymore, and by using our speed boost to ensure that we can cover more ground in a shorter period of time, we're able to get close enough to Alpha to take advantage of this. And I'm personally finding that the speed boost on the Ognevoi is very useful for when you need to cover ground, because this ship's top speed as standard is not too great, i.e. 37 knots, which compared to some of the destroyers you can face feels very slow. The speed boost kicking up towards 40 knots. That's not to say that this is a sluggish ship, because compared to cruisers and battleships of course you'll move a lot faster than them typically, and we can cover the ground on our own speed, as we'll see later on when we haven't got the speed boost available. But here we're making the most of it, and in throwing down our 2 quintuple sets of torpedoes, which are rather effective, we're using those to try and push back the enemy Grasp Bay, because we expect they probably pushed into the objective with Hydro active, and they see a wall of torpedoes heading their way. they'll be likely to reverse out the objective because they'll think that we, i.e. the Ognevoi, alternatively the Benson, although our Benson has been clearly spotted on the minimap with the Z-23 engaging them head-to-head in Objective Bravo, it'll just push the Graf Spee backwards. And the reason I say that they could confuse us for the Benson is because both we and the Benson get 2 quintuple sets of torpedoes, albeit we have the greater range of 10 kilometers versus their 9.2 kilometers. Our torpedoes in general are quite slow with a 56 knot top speed. That's comparable to the approximate 55 knots from what I recall on the Benson's torpedoes, and our torpedoes get detected at a distance of 1.1 kilometers as standard, which means they're slow but can take enemy ships by surprise and do a good amount of damage, dealing 15,100 per torpedo hit maximum. We also have a nice thing on our torpedoes, and that is their rather fast reload of 92 seconds. It's amazing how quickly you can get your next set of torpedoes up, as we're about to see here, almost finished reloading already. But coming back towards the objectives, we can see that by creeping into Alpha, we're going to take it right from the noses of the enemy fleet, and we position ourselves in a way so we can spot the enemy Akatsuki as they come back in towards Objective Alpha, because even with a full concealment build, we will see them before they see us. And therefore we can provide our team with the knowledge that the Akatsuki is coming back into Alpha, alternatively they're not coming back into Alpha and must be hidden somewhere west of the objective. Now, having taken Alpha, we're breaking away because what we can see is over time both carriers have decided to take their engagement over to Alpha, with our friendly carrier trying to bomb the enemy ships, particularly the Graf Spee, and we're going to achieve 1 torpedo hit on the bow of the Graf Spee, which does a good amount of damage and a tiny bit of flooding, but they repair the flooding very quickly. Now, breaking away, we decide to run back to our fleet, so rather than be targeted by the enemy bombers as they go over the fleet, they're more likely to engage the capital ships, and that means as well we can offer smoke to capital ships that need the assistance, particularly our Hood, who's about to take a considerable amount of damage from the enemy carrier, and we want to be there to give them the smoke if they require it. And you'll see I type in the chat in a minute, Hood, would you like the smoke? They don't respond, and I evaluate the situation to see that the Hood is not under threat from enemy ships by the looks of things, so therefore I decide not to deploy it. I make a calculated guess here, and if the Hood had requested it, I would have deployed it. And we can see I even slowed down. But moving on, what am I now thinking? What I can see on the minimap is the Akatsuki on the enemy team has decided to stay down the 1 line by looks of things, because we're not seeing that Alpha is being captured. And on top of that, looking towards the centre of the map, we can see that the enemy Benson is really pushing close to our Fiji, and we would expect our Fiji, the Tier VII British cruiser, to rip them to pieces. Therefore, we're not too worried about the Benson's presence in the centre. However, what is starting to alarm us, as we get some cheeky shots in here on the enemy Miyoko, is that Objective Charlie has not been contested, and we now have a Queen Elizabeth and a Tirpitz coming down from that objective. As we toss some shells over with our 2 twin 130mm cannon mounted in an AX configuration, one of the more curious aspects of the Ognevoi, because you only have 4 guns compared to the typicality of 5 or 6 guns at the tier, i.e. Tier VIII, you can do a considerable amount of damage with your high explosive, whereby per shell hit you can do a maximum of 1,900 when 8% fire chance as standard, and with your armour piercing, if an enemy ship gives you broadside, apart from destroyers of course, you can do a maximum of 2,600 per citadel, and the armour piercing is nothing to laugh at. And shell velocity in general is very nice, with both shells starting with an initial velocity of 900 meters per second, meaning that you don't have to provide too much lead to hit your foes, even out to your maximum standard range of 12 kilometers. Now, in creeping back into Bravo, we see that our Fiji has overexposed themselves to the enemy Bismarck, and what we decided to do here is not throw our torpedoes towards the Bismarck, because what we note is the way they're positioned at the moment, they're reacting to the torpedoes of our Fiji and are therefore drifting westwards, or at least southwestwards we could say, based on their orientation on the minimap. On top of that, we have noted that an enemy Hipper is coming into the objective, and we want to delay them and capture him for as long as possible, because we have a friendly Bismarck just off to our southeast who is trying to hold up the enemy Queen Elizabeth and the enemy Tirpitz, pretty much sitting in grid position G6 and holding those 2 battleships up as they push down. We throw our torpedoes towards the Hipper at long distance, anticipating that they'll either drift out broadside here, alternatively they'll turn back in and have to make their way behind the central landmass at Bravo. If they don't do option 2 and instead continue to drift out, they'll sail right into our torpedo feed. Although we would expect perhaps alongside the fighter gunner, i.e. the catapult fighter, they may also have hydro loaded and therefore would see our torpedoes going for a very long distance. And despite her lack of manoeuvrability compared to some cruisers, the Hipper can still dodge torpedoes very easily when they're spotted in excess of 4 kilometers distance. When trying to hold up the Hipper here, they do give us a significant broadside for our armour piercing shells to have a go at, and we only get off 1 salvo before they disappear. And this is why the awkward part, and the fact that we're not being able to fire at them because we haven't got anybody else spotting them apart from our own ship that was spotting them. And they're not firing back, which means they're not going to spot themselves for us whilst we're sat in our smoke screen. And for reference, our detectability when firing in smoke is 2.9 kilometers. So with that, we are unfortunately forced to drift out of our smoke because the Hipper may have thrown torpedoes into our smoke at their 6 kilometer range. And as we can see, we guessed that right, albeit the Hipper guessed the distance to the smoke screen incorrectly, with the torpedoes just ending up outside of the smoke. But we played it safe. And in return, we drift over towards our Bismarck here to provide some additional anti-aircraft support against the torpedo bombers. You'll see that my AA is active with its maximum range of 5.2 kilometers, albeit a maximum range it only does 25 damage per second with the two twin 130mm cannon batteries. But still, bring down the occasional plane is always a satisfying item to think of, especially what the enemy torpedo bombers being tier 9s because it's a Saipan. And unfortunately here, as we try to throw our shells over the landmass in the centre to hit the enemy Hipper, we fire our second salvo a little bit too late, and as a result, one of the shells will hit the Hipper just after they've captured Objective Bravo. So now we have to think, how can we dislodge the Hipper? Well, with the enemy Queen Elizabeth having fallen and the enemy Tirpitz drifting way too far south for Charlie to be able to engage us on Objective Bravo from the eastern side, we can move in with our Bismarck and support them here. So I'm using the torpedo lead indicator here to tell our Bismarck what the Hipper's doing. So I've said they're going forward. And then they start going backwards, so I type in reversing to let them know which way that enemy ship's going, because if the Hipper's allowed to ambush our Bismarck with their torpedoes, it could prove quite a page turner. In return, rather than go with the Bismarck, I'm going to split the concentration of the enemy Hipper. I'm expecting to be targeted by the enemy aircraft, alternatively that they will drift over me. So as a result, I've already switched on my anti-aircraft again to try and shoot down the occasional plane, help out our friendly fighters, and help out our Bismarck from perhaps not taking a torpedo, which they would have taken if a torpedo bomb was allowed to make their way in. Now, I'm not expecting tons of planes to fall out the sky, but I'm doing whatever I can to just try and help out here. And at the same time, as I make my way round the western side of the central island with an Objective Bravo, what we can see is our Bismarck is starting to drift this way as well, but the enemy Hipper is still reversing out to engage our Bismarck. And our Bismarck actually appears to be gradually slowing down rather than continuing to push around with us. They appear to have anticipated that the Hipper's reversing out and they want to get a full broadside of armour piercing into them. Now this means we can rush around, and in the meantime we can see that on the western side of the map, the enemy battleships, i.e. the Arizona, the Scharnhorst and the Bismarck, are all engrossed in taking out our Bayern and Hood at Objective Alpha, which means we're not getting shot at. We're not running priority targets, we don't know whether anybody's targeting us right now. Instead we've gone for preventative maintenance because we're going for the hybrid builder being able to soak up a little bit more damage to our modules when going head to head with enemy destroyers. It's one of the trade-offs of that. And we make our way round and catch the Hipper on their bow. Now rather than continue to shell them, we're going to use both sets of torpedoes because we know how quickly they can reload, and we anticipate they may drift at a slight angle, so we're setting up our torpedoes so that the second set will collide and take them out of the game. We see one torpedo going, and as the Hipper turns around, another torpedo goes in as well, and we turn into the incoming torpedoes from the enemy torpedo bombers, dodging the first set by riding one on the side of our ship on the port side, and we see the other torpedo bombers try to come in as well. They're getting orientated, so we immediately go to smoke, because this time it's going to be important that we take this objective as quickly as possible and as safely as possible. Because as we can see, whilst we do have one more ship than the enemy team at the moment, the points lead is going to drift in favour of the enemy team, what of them having Charlie and capturing Alpha currently. So if we can take Bravo away from them, we keep the points lead on our side, particularly now that both teams are on equal numbers of ships and the enemy team has the points lead. But by having pretty much constantly two objectives versus the enemy team's singular objective, you'll note that as we've lost ships, we haven't really felt the effect on our points. Instead, we've actually been quite close because we've had the objectives to give us the points over time to make up the gap for the ships we've lost. And here we see the exposed broadside of an enemy Arizona at 8.3 kilometers, and we can see our armour piercing does a wonderful job whilst they expose a full broadside. But as soon as they start angling away from it, i.e. turning westwards, we have a bit of an issue as we pick up another captured base. Now in the meantime, we could at this point go for the enemy Saipan, who is located literally on the other side of the island, which is north of Objective Bravo. But the issue I have with doing this right now is I would be having to force myself to drift towards the enemy battleships at Objective Alpha, who in turn may have the presumption or the desire to shoot at myself in reaction for me going towards the Saipan. So instead, I decide to take the safer option of going towards Charlie, because what I'm thinking here is, looking at the minimap, our Hood is the only ship at Alpha, and in a 2 versus 1 situation, they're not going to be able to hold up. So instead, why not go with the fleet and provide ourselves with the ability to A, bait the enemy aircraft onto our fleet over time, and B, go with the fleet for the later engagements whereby it may be the case we need all of our fleet's guns firing rather than just one ship's guns. And in a war of our puny little guns versus the guns on Arizona, where if we're all hitting with every shell, we know what's going to happen, we're going to sink, the Arizona will survive. So instead, going towards Charlie is the most advisable option, based on my experience. And we'll note here that despite our lack of speed boost being available, and this is one of the downsides of not running Superintendent, whereby we've already run out of our consumables for this match, we can make our way towards the objective in decent time. And this is where the 37 knot speed is going to feel aggravating if it's a destroyer race, but if you've got the ability to play a safe option such as this, it's not as much of a problem. And as we can see, with our team having 4 ships to the enemy's 3, we've still got the points lead, whether our ability to have an additional ship over the enemy team, and the fact we've had multiple objectives typically compared to the enemy team's 1, so that's enabled us to keep building up the points at a faster rate. So what we can see is that by playing over the objectives, i.e. making sure that the objectives come first, rather than going and hunting down enemy ships that are not close to the objectives, we've been able to keep our team in touch with the game. Pardon me. Now, I'm not crediting our current situation all to our own ship, but you can see how important the build-up of points over time is in a domination match. As we now start capturing Charlie, and this is only going to push our team's points lead even higher over time. In return, we can see that down towards Objective Alpha, the 2 enemy battleships haven't even got into Objective Alpha yet. Meanwhile, we've almost got to the halfway point of capturing this objective, and our friendly Prinz Eugen is going to come in to speed things up very shortly. So besides that, what are my thoughts on the Ognevoi so far? Well, I must admit, for a hybrid destroyer, and I say hybrid because I feel that this destroyer has characteristics which suits the idea of it being a torpedo destroyer, it being a gunboat destroyer, it being the destroyer hunter. It's got a little bit of everything. It's a jack of all trades, master of none. It's a very interesting destroyer to play because you really feel out your comfort zone, knowing that whenever you try to do something, such as go head-to-head with, say, a Benson, or alternatively, when you try to use your torpedoes against enemy capital ships, like battleships and heavy cruisers, you're not being able to maximise the effect of that role simply because your ship is not designed to maximise a particular role. If I was saying in the Kagera, for instance, I would know that my torpedoes are my bread and butter and I'm able to do excellent damage with my torpedoes and they've got the wonderful range. Meanwhile, if I was saying in the Benson, I'd have my fast firing guns, which are ideal for close range knife fighting against destroyers. Here I've got a mixture, and I could extend to the Kiev, the other Tier VIII Soviet destroyer, which is the gunboat, which has the brilliant gun range, particularly when you mount advanced firing training, and the ability to set fires on enemy ships on a regular occurrence because you're spamming so many shells at them. So it's a real middle ground with this ship, and I think it's going to take a long time before I can safely say, yep, I know how this ship feels now, I know how it plays, and I really do truly enjoy it. That's not to say I'm not enjoying it at the moment, but I think I've still got a significant learning curve. Now, coming back to what we're doing at this point, we're gradually sneaking our way around towards the enemy Saipan, who hasn't changed location at all throughout this match ever since they were spotted. Now, instead they decide to idle towards the northwestern corner of Objective Bravo, and we're going to sneak up and take them from the northeastern side. And we've been able to appreciate this simply because when they haven't been spotted, the planes have been originating from the same point on the map. And in coming around here, we can see that the Saipan has got their engine running. It appears they've got their engine running into the landmass still. They're not reversing, as we can see with our torpedo lead indicator. And we throw our torpedoes down here, so that way if the Saipan decides to stay there, they'll take torpedo hits. If they decide to start reversing, they'll take torpedo hits. And we continue to throw some armor piercing, picking up a cheeky citadel there. And trying to replicate that now, we see that we have no luck. Instead, we're getting the occasional penetration and the occasional over-penetration, but our torpedoes will get the job done. Another load of penetrations there. Saipan is out the game. And with that, our team's points lead is so far forward now that with our 2 objectives and the lack of time remaining in the match, even if our team was to lose, say, our Bayern, for example, which we just did to the enemy Arizona, how about that? We've still got more than enough points to lead that so long as our team doesn't do anything absolutely stupid in the last 1 minute of the match, and that includes myself, I shouldn't go charging in there aiming to kill the Arizona, for example, just to get myself ripped apart. We've got this game in the bag because we were able to build up the points over the course of the game and see the long-term solution rather than the short-term go grab a kill. And with the Arizona drifting towards Objective Bravo, we know that the speed of a battleship is going to be significantly lower than the speed of our own destroyer, and this is why the downsides of having to try and play catch up on objectives over the course of a match when you're in a battleship, or indeed in a slow cruiser. And here, with 45 seconds remaining, we are going to start teasing the enemy Arizona by throwing the occasional salvo of high explosive towards them. But first, let's make sure the torpedoes are reloaded. In fact, we switched towards armour piercing there, anticipating that the Arizona would sail out to a broadside to us, and as we can see, they do start to do so before reacting and turning their bow back towards us. Quite a flexible rudder shift on that ship by the looks of things. I don't own one myself. But in tossing the shells in, the game's practically at its end as we now switch back to high explosive, getting no luck on penetrating them with our armour piercing, and the same prevails with our high explosive. We don't get any penetrations, and we turn over their salvo from their bow mounted A/B turret to make sure we don't get hit. Cutting our speed as well, just to duke any fire from the Scharnhorst potentially, who's actually behind a landmass, and that brings the game to an end. Time to take a look at the post-game stats. A rather slow journey to victory in the case of this match. We can see that our battle performance amounted to a total damage of 87,889 HP of damage, and on top of that we picked up the standard achievement of Devastating Strike, for destroying an enemy ship with a single artillery salvo, torpedo salvo, or aircraft, by causing damage to over 50% of the destroyed ship's normal health pool. In this case, it was with our torpedoes on the enemy Saipan towards the end. Coming on to the team scores, we can see that we topped our team in terms of base experience earned, picking up 2,257. A large chunk of this can be attributed to the 2 solo captures and 2 assisted captures we picked up during the course of the game, but if anything this goes to highlight that when playing the destroyer it's not always about going destroyer hunting or torpedoing the enemy fleet from distance. Sometimes it's about just spreading your ship out across the map, particularly when your team has one less destroyer than the enemy team, and making up for the deficit by heading from objective to objective, sneaking in, taking the point and then getting out, moving between the open spaces, and that way enabling your team to stay in the game even when they've lost a considerable number of ships compared to the enemy team. And as we saw here, even when we were down in terms of ships, we were never truly down in terms of points. And as the numbers of ships on each team started to even out in the final quarter and in favour of our team, the points advantage our team had only got greater and greater. Coming on to our detailed report, we have 2 key items to note here that reinforce our observation that our role in this match was focused very heavily around taking the points. Firstly, the number of capture points we picked up, 190 out of a possible 240. This is over 75% of the total number of capture points picked up by our team. And secondly, the amount of distance we travelled, which shows how much ground we covered over the match and the idea of us spreading our destroyer over the battlefield rather than focusing on key areas. We travelled a total distance of 95.91 kilometres. And finally, coming onto our credits and experience earned, we can see that after additions and deductions, we walked to have a total of 138,640 silver credits and 6,772 commander experience. To conclude, hopefully today we've demonstrated the value as a destroyer captain of focusing specifically on the objectives in the Domination game type, whereby spreading your destroyer across the map rather than focusing on a particular objective and the enemy fleet that lies beyond it can enable your team to stay in the game when the odds are not looking in their favour from a points perspective. In the case of our own Ognevoi, we saw quite early on that by focusing the objective Bravo and then objective Alpha and providing our team with 2 points to the enemy team's 1, we're able to provide our team with enough points to stay in the game when our team's numbers started to dwindle compared to the enemy's. And as the numbers started to turn in the favour of our team over the course of the game, the points advantage really came into our team's own as the match went on, particularly in the final quarter. Now it could be argued that this is a rather selfish style of play, and at particular instances we worked solo and we deployed smoke solely for ourselves rather than for our teammates' benefit. But we also saw in particular when we retook objective Bravo from the enemy fleet, that we worked with a friendly Bismarck in order to do so, providing them information on the Admiral Hipper's movements. And this goes to show that the life of destroyer is not one that's completely team-based, nor is it one that's completely solo, particularly in the case of a hybrid destroyer such as the Ognevoi, but one where you need to continually drift between the 2 forms. And at the end of today's match, our team would have been laughing to itself and saying, or quoting I should say, the wonderful video game meme, which is, "All your base are belong to us." And so I've been TX141, and if you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future World of Warships videos on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and fair seas.